Destination Moon and the role that St. Louis played in the space race. That's next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Destination Moon, the Apollo mission, is a new exhibition that's about to open at the St. Louis Science Center. I'd like you to meet our guest right now. To my right is Christina Hampton. She is the exhibition's project manager. And to her right is Christian Greer. He's the Science Center's Chief Officer of Science, Education, and Experience. Welcome. That's quite a title you have, Christian.
Yeah, it's an interesting title, but it's a fun place to work, and I'm happy to be able to serve St. Louis and the Science Center in that capacity.
Well, since you say it's a fun place to work, wow, how many places are there in the United States like the Science Center? There's only a handful.
Well, there are lots of science centers all over the world, but not like ours, because one of the most important features is that we're free. So that accessibility and staying relevant is very important to us. And of our size, we have 1 million people a year that come to the Science Center. We're only one of 3 or 4 major science centers that have free admission. So that's a fantastic thing for St. Louis and great for us.
It is. And Christina, what strikes you about the St. Louis Science Center that makes it unique?
I think what the Science Center does best is provides that hands-on learning environment for people, but also, tailors that with real artifacts, because the Science Center has a collection of over 100,000 artifacts, and many people aren't aware of that fact.
And when I was young, I remember going to the planetarium, and that was it. But
yeah.
Boy, you've expanded. You've got the facility across the highway, which is connected and everything.
Right.
I don't know if you know square footage, but how big a place do you have?
Well, we're fairly large as the Science Center goes, because we have the planetarium, the Omni Theater, and we just opened 50,000 square feet to the west of the building, which is our Grow Agriculture exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
So there's quite a bit of space to have a lot of fun, even for little kids in our Discovery Room.
Yeah, and Christina, I know exhibitions, I don't know how many exhibitions you have in a year, but it's there's something always new.
Absolutely, and not just exhibitions, but we're constantly, revising and updating our gallery spaces too. So there's always something new when you come to the Science Center.
If someone out there hasn't seen one of the star shows, in the planetarium, they're missing something.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
All right, we want to talk about this new exhibition that's set to open very soon, and it's Destination Moon, the Apollo mission. And for maybe people of a certain age, younger people might not remember that date like I do. I was a freshman in high school on July 24th, 1969, and I remember that date like it was yesterday, because I sat in my grandparents' living room on the floor and watched the Apollo mission land on the moon, the first man to walk on the moon. And it's a day I will never forget. In your words, how important was that day?
I think it was a monumental moment in human history. So this is not something that we can gloss over or take lightly. This is something that changed the course of human history. Technology, advancements in science, changed it forever.
What did he say? One step for man?
One giant leap for mankind.
Right. And it all went back to President John F. Kennedy, something like 8 years before that.
Right.
Who sort of like set the challenge, right?
It really did. The speech at Rice University really set the tone for the next few years in regards to space race. The rendezvous and docking in orbit, testing of the launch vehicle, the Saturn V, traveling all the way to the moon, 238,000 miles, to get there.
That's one way.
And to break, and then to come back and then orbit around the moon. It was a very complex mission that actually required computers, and we don't think about computers as playing as big of a role back in the late 60s as they do today. But they had some very earliest computers that used rope memory that was probably the equivalent of a Commodore 64 for those who remember that computer.
And do you have kind of a feeling on what the mood was like after President Kennedy made that challenge, and then during those 8 years, when all the scientists behind the scenes were doing the work? I mean, they must have made a lot of mistakes and had to do things over and over and over. It must have been so challenging.
Well, it was, and many of the engineers, some right here in St. Louis that were working on the Mercury and Gemini capsules, when the call went out to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth, the engineers were struck by the fact, like, how are we going to do that?
Who are we looking at right now?
Yeah, we have here are the astronauts that actually flew on the Apollo 11 mission with the capsule behind. To the left is Neil Armstrong, who was the commander, the Lunar Module pilot, Buzz Aldrin. Many people know Buzz. And the character Buzz Lightyear was kind of he was an influencer on that. And then Michael Collins, who really was the commander of the ship, the Columbia, that we're bringing
He's probably
here.
the less known name, don't you think?
Yeah, he's probably the least known because he was the person who stayed behind in the capsule while the other two went down for the landing in the Lunar Module. But he later became the president of the National Air and Space Museum and Smithsonian, and that's one of the reasons why we're getting this capsule.
You
here
made
in St.
reference to
Louis.
it just a second ago, how important St. Louis was to this whole story. How would you put it?
Well, the space program started right here in St. Louis at McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, but lesser known, we also did a lot of the charting of the moon right here at ACIC, so the Aeronautical Chart and Information Center, and they're the reason that the Apollo astronauts knew where to land. They helped pick the landing sites for them to land on the moon.
Wow, that's amazing. And this is an interesting exhibition from another standpoint, too. I may not have this straight in my head, you tell me, but it hasn't been seen that many places. What we're able to see now at the St. Louis Science Center, probably a lot of people haven't seen at all.
Yeah, this is a rare opportunity. If you've been to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., you've seen the capsule. As a matter of fact, a couple years ago, we actually went to the Air and Space Museum on a meeting of another type. And I remember walking in front of the capsule that we have a model here, of Apollo 11 Columbia, and saying, gosh, it would be great to have this in our museum. I had no idea that 2 years later we'd be talking about bringing this to St. Louis. So it's a great honor for us to be able to do that.
And
it's only going to 4 locations.
Yes, and currently it's in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, but before this, it's been in Washington, D.C. for 40 years, and it only went on tour once. So this is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a lot of people in our area.
And it'll be here how long?
It'll be here from April to September, so it opens April 14th and then closes September 3rd.
And Christian, you said something about that it's free.
Well, we have free for members, so we have our membership has increased dramatically over the last few years after our exhibit on King Tut, and now with the Apollo 11 Destination Moon exhibit, we are making this exhibit free for our members. So we expect our membership to increase, and we definitely want people to renew. But we have various levels of fees to get in, and many are discounted. So our general fee is
general for adults it's $10 to
$10.
get into the exhibition. Of course, the Science Center is always free, but this exhibition is $10.
Right. Of course, they can always go to your website and find out details about that.
That's
Yes.
right. Yeah.
So this particular exhibition, Destination Moon, the Apollo mission, how many things are we looking at? What are we going to see there?
There are 20 different artifacts that come along with the exhibition, but there's also a wealth of information and pictures and resources from the Smithsonian that they're bringing with it as well. 14 of the artifacts that are coming were actually flown on the mission, so these went into space. Of course, the crown jewel of that is the Command Module Columbia itself, which took the astronauts up into the moon's orbit.
Do you want to kind of talk about that, Christian?
Sure, I could just hold this one up, which is the command module. So this is a model of the vehicle. And maybe if I point it here towards the camera, you'll get a chance to see just how it's configured. We have an entry door here, and inside of that door, which we will have on display, just on the other side is the control panel with all of the flight instruments. There are 3 seats on what is known as a bench inside of the capsule itself. And then it has actual windows on the side. So a lot of times you don't think about these capsules have windows to be able to look out. And of course, when they're launching, there's not much to look at. But certainly when the moon is getting a lot bigger in the window, you recognize that you're traveling to the moon. And that's what the astronauts saw in this vehicle.
How much room was there in there for those 3 guys?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you think about being in this space with a full spacesuit on, it's pretty cramped with 3 people on the inside. You can kind of see
the image we're looking at
the
now?
image here. This is looking down into the capsule towards the bench. The middle seat was Michael Collins. To the right would be Buzz Aldrin, and to the left is the commander's seat.
And is that a control panel
Armstrong.
I'm looking at?
Yep, that's a control panel there with hundreds of switches that are on and around, and even some indicators that show attitude control for the vehicle's progress through space.
Wow. Do you have any insight, I don't know if this is part of the exhibit, but the personal stories of the 3 astronauts that went up there, I mean, I would think they'd be scared to death. I mean, this is something that no one had done before. Did they know they were even going to come back?
Well, it's interesting. We do have there are personal stories for them inside the exhibition, but at the Science Center we're building experiences to go with this. So it's not just the Smithsonian exhibition. We're also building exhibits around it. So we take an opportunity to tell these stories a little bit. And one of my favorites is Michael Collins. Most people don't think about him very often. It's Neil and Buzz who went to the surface of the moon.
Right.
But Michael Collins stayed for 24 hours in this command module by himself.
Wow.
And he had to make a monumental decision. If something were to go wrong, he might have had to leave Neil and Buzz on the surface and come back by himself. So that's just a huge thing you don't think about. And it's, monument. I can't imagine being in his shoes.
And what a psychological thing to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, absolutely. And Neil Armstrong, who was the commander of the mission, who we know from saying the words in the first step on the moon, very accomplished pilot, flew the the X-15 space plane, was the only civilian astronaut at the time. He had remarked just how violent the ride up was on the Saturn V launch vehicle. And they experienced an effect called pogo. And pogo essentially, as you can imagine from the old pogo stick, was sort of a violent, what they call a longitudinal oscillation, where the rocket, it was called a longitudinal oscillation, where the rocket would just violently shake up and down, and it made it difficult to even see the instruments for the first few minutes of the flight.
You know what I was thinking of too, how frightening it would be going to the moon and doing that, but coming back would be just as stressful because you're not guaranteed a successful reentry, right?
Absolutely.
That's right. If the chutes didn't open, the drogue chute and the main parachutes for them to land and splash down in the Pacific, that would have been a little challenging. But of course, as with NASA vehicles, things are tested over and over and over again, and there are redundancies, and they do the best job they can to make sure the vehicles are safe. But for those of you who have seen the Apollo 13 or know about the Apollo 13 mission, not everything goes as planned.
What kind of, I was going to ask you what kind of response you've gotten, but the exhibition hasn't opened yet. So I'm curious, though, how people see it differently. Someone like me that remembers watching on TV compared to maybe a young person today that this is just something they read about in their history books, if we experience it in a different way.
Well, it's interesting with all the news currently about SpaceX and launching the Falcon Heavy, and we are still thinking about space, and I think kids today are still thinking about that, and that's the next generation that will go into space.
Do we have a date to be back on the moon again?
I know NASA's working towards that goal, and they have upcoming missions planned. So with the Orion spacecraft and also with Dragon X, things like that. I mean, we are looking towards space again and how we're going to get back. So that's something we could see in the future. Maybe one of those kids comes to the exhibition and gets inspired to be an astronaut.
Right. How many astronauts are there? I guess there are a bunch of people, even though we're not going into space right now. How many astronauts are there trained that could go? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I know there have been a recent class. Like every year they have a new class of astronauts and usually have about 9 or so astronauts. But one of the things we don't think about are the astronauts, cosmonauts, and other space flyers from all over the world. China has astronauts. There are astronauts in Canada. Of course, we know about the Russian space program. There are European astronauts. There are Israeli astronauts. There are people from all over the world that end up going to the International Space Station.
And if anybody watches the Big Bang Theory, of course, that's been
Right.
one of the subplots
Right.
there, right? Right. Well, we need to take a little break. We'll be back with more about Destination Moon right after this. Stay with us.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
Why do you not get me?
I do. This is what it feels like for kids with learning and attention issues. Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Did you know parking over tall, dry grass can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Today we're talking about a new exhibition that's about to open at the St. Louis Science Center. That's Destination Moon, the Apollo mission. And we're talking to my immediate right is Christina Hampton. She is the exhibition's project manager. And also here is Christian Greer. He's the Science Center's Chief Officer of Science, Education, and Experience. And what an experience it is every time you go to the Science Center. But to recap briefly, this exhibition has to do with man's landing on the moon, and it's a lot of artifacts that were right there. Would you recap what we're going to see again?
Well, yeah, the question came up about, is the exhibit for everyone? And to some extent it is, because we recognize that a lot of people, especially here in St. Louis, remember the space race. And as Steve, you talked about earlier about sitting down and watching the actual launch and landing in your living room, well, we decided to actually recreate that experience. And on the front end of the exhibit will be a St. Louis themed street with artifacts from our own collection, which Christina can talk about, that actually kind of puts you back in the 60s. And then you walk into a mid-century modern home with a living room, with a record player, and a television set where you can watch the broadcast.
Yeah, I had
the
vinyl records.
Yeah, you'll just have to bring them in. You can bring them in and play them at the Science Center, because we're definitely trying to recreate that experience. And Christina can talk a little bit about some of the artifacts.
Well, let's, we just had an image. As I bring that one back up, Christina, you could talk about it.
Sure. So this is in the Destination Moon exhibition itself. This is Buzz Aldrin's gloves. So these are the gloves he wore as part of his suit for protection, of course, on the moon's surface.
What do you know about when they were in the capsule wearing all this stuff? Were they able to move around very much? Obviously, could they wash up? They didn't take a shower or anything like that. How did that work?
Well, living in space was very new at the time, and so there was a lot of things that they just kind of had to learn along the way. Previous missions allowed them to practice, but one thing that I think people forget about is that when you're in space, in free fall or weightlessness, or some people would say microgravity, you have a lot more room in the capsule. Because now what's on the ceiling and the floor and those spaces are now available to you because you're not confined to your seats based on gravity. So even though it looks cramped when they start the mission, as they fly off into space in weightlessness, they have the ability to move around more freely.
Wow. Let's look at another image we have from the exhibition, Destination Moon at the St. Louis Science Center.
This is Buzz Aldrin's helmet. So yeah, this has the visor that comes down, but also the gold visor. So that's the iconic image that you see sometimes of the Apollo astronauts with the gold visor.
Let's go to the next one. Or maybe not. If not, though, there we go.
There we go.
And that is...
So this is interesting. This is the Apollo mission patch, and this mission patch was designed partially by the astronauts. You'll notice the depiction of the eagle landing on the surface of the moon with the Earth in the background and an olive branch representing that we came in peace.
And Christina, what's this?
This is a star chart. So this was used by the astronauts to kind of help navigate and find their way.
Oh, that's like the old highway map we used to look at.
Right.
Sort of.
This one shows the stars instead of roads.
And Michael Collins served as the navigator, and his role was to figure out exactly what their position was in space, which is not easy to do. But they use a sextant, just like you would on a Navy ship, and they help to determine their location.
What do you know about, did they have a regular sleep schedule, or do you know what their day was like? I guess there are no days in space, right?
It's interesting. Their entire mission was pretty much, scripted and ordered, just like plays in a playbook, and they had to go through each one and make every check that was necessary to make sure the vehicle was on course and that all the systems were functioning properly. So a lot of times on the schedule, it just says astronauts sleep, or Lunar Module pilots sleeps, or this person sleeps. And I can imagine being an astronaut. You can't just fall asleep at the time that it's supposedly scheduled. So it was tough for them to get the time to really sleep the way they needed
no
to.
smartphones, so they couldn't like be on Facebook and
Right,
be
that's
texting
right.
people and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then sleeping in space is a little different too, because you're floating around, so they have to kind of tie themselves. So on the moon, when they were scheduled to sleep, they had sleeping bags that were kind of like hammocks that were strung inside the capsule. But what's interesting about the lunar module, and what's so exciting about this, is this lunar module here didn't have seats. They actually were to stand up the entire mission down to the surface of the moon. And so the two astronauts would be inside, Neil Armstrong on this side and Buzz Aldrin on the other side, and they stood the whole way as they landed, and using their legs as a cushioning system.
And Velcro. They had Velcro on the bottom of the lunar module and, on their boots.
Do you have a favorite item in the exhibition, just personally?
Oh, my goodness. That's like asking me to pick a favorite child or something.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think really the Columbia is just, I think that's going to be awe-inspiring. And I had a similar feeling to Christian when I saw it in Washington, D.C. It's amazing to think about. This is what took the astronauts to the moon. This is what they stayed in, what they were in space in for 8 days. I can't imagine what that was like and what was going through
They
their
must have had a
head.
backup plan of the government or something in the case that none of them came back, right?
Yes,
Do we know anything about that?
Well, I can't remember exactly what has been shared about that, but certainly the president, Richard Nixon, at the time, who congratulated the astronauts while they were on the moon or returning back from their mission, also had to prepare something to be ready to speak to the nation in the event that the mission failed.
Right.
And luckily, of all the missions that traveled to the moon, even with Apollo 13, all the astronauts were brought safely back to the Earth, which is an incredible feat.
What are we looking at
Here's
here?
the recovery here of the capsule on the USS Hornet. You can see the deployment of the flotation devices around the edge to keeping it float in the Pacific.
And the oceans, that's a big place.
Yeah.
It's a
I
huge
think
place.
it'd be really hard to be so accurate where they're going to land, because if the boats weren't there.
Well,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
And that, just one quick thing, and for those that saw the movie Hidden Figures, that was one of the things I was talking about, pinpointing John Glenn's descent into the Pacific Ocean and the math that was used to be able to determine that position.
You brought a magazine with you.
I did. I have this magazine here, which I'll hold up. This is our New Science magazine. It's our member magazine. So for those of you who are members, you probably have gotten this in the mail. But one of the things that's excited about it is totally dedicated to Destination Moon, the exhibit that we're bringing here on April 14th. And we're so excited because we may not have mentioned that we're a Smithsonian affiliate. And this is one of the reasons why we were able to bring this to St. Louis. And I have a lot of museum colleagues all over the country, and I don't waste a moment not bragging about how it's coming to St. Louis and not to their area. We're so very proud to have it in this town because, as Christina mentioned, this is in some ways the birthplace of the space race, and many of the capsules, the Gemini and Mercury, which we also have at the planetarium, are here in St. Louis.
Christina, you're the project manager. I would imagine that individuals can, of course, come in and see this exhibition, but I'm guessing you have like a lot of school groups that would be coming through?
We will. The bulk of the exhibition will be over this summer, but we do have field trip packages for April and May and some in August. So
and they're all sold out.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of opportunity for kids, but for families too. I mean, this can be something that spans generations. So grandparents have an opportunity to talk to their grandkids about what they remember, what they witnessed.
When they were sitting on the floor like I was watching
Yeah.
TV. What's the item in the middle you brought?
Well, this item here represents a combination of space vehicles. The top is the command module, and this is the vehicle that's going to be coming here. And the bottom is a kind of an unknown part of the spacecraft, which is called the service module. So this command and service module was a package that flew to the moon. And on its configuration to the moon, it was actually docked with the lunar module, or the landing vehicle. And so it would travel the distance all the way to the moon. These would undock. And you'll hear Neil Armstrong make the remark as he's testing the attitude control thrusters, the Eagle has wings. And that's because this vehicle here, the lander, was known as the Eagle. It went down in powered descent, landed on the surface. The upper stage, once they were done, released, came up, rendezvoused, and docked with the spacecraft. And then this part of the spacecraft traveled back to Earth. and this is what landed in the Pacific Ocean.
Christian, I just have a feeling about you all of a sudden. You want to be an astronaut, don't you?
Oh, I'd love to be. I don't know if I meet the age requirement, but certainly in spirit, if I could go to the moon or Mars, it was a great dream of mine as a kid. I majored in physics. I was interested in astronomy and space, and to be able to work in a science center is a great privilege.
Yeah, Christina, what was your background in science? What got you to this point?
I actually have a background in history, so
well, that makes sense too.
Yeah.
For this, yeah.
And for my normal job at the Science Center is collections manager, so I take care of all of our collection of artifacts. And for me, it's about stories. So history, artifacts, there's so many stories to tell, and this is a great example of an artifact telling a story.
Well, does any story come to mind right now that we haven't mentioned?
Well, I did see an image of the rucksack, and the survival kit. So that was what the astronauts had with them in the command module, took with them to space. But it had those things that they might need should they land somewhere other than the ocean, or should they get off course. So my favorite part of that is the machete that's included. there it is.
Okay, what are we looking at?
So this is the survival kit. So it's a kit that has everything they might need.
So machete to fend off wild animals?
Or maybe cut through the jungle, depending on where they land. Goggles in case, sunny or snowy, wherever they might land.
But what else have we got in there? Can you tell?
Yeah, it's difficult
There's
to tell.
food,
There are food, bandages, that kind of
Probably
thing.
bottled water. Stuff like that.
Right.
Gee. And a lot of what you do at the Science Center, at least I know other exhibitions, is interactive. So does that play a role in this? Anything interactive?
Yeah, there's a little bit inside the Smithsonian exhibition, Destination Moon itself. So there'll be touch screens where you can kind of look through the interior and exterior views. They recently took 3D scanned the interior of the Columbia as well as the exterior. So you can kind of look through those and see everything, the astronaut graffiti that they've recently found on the inside.
Wait a minute, astronaut graffiti?
Yeah, so they discovered when they went in and did these views that the astronauts had left notes on the sides of the command module. So
Some things never change.
yeah.
We just have like about a minute left. I don't know, kind of bottom line, what do you feel like the average person's going to get out of experiencing this exhibition?
Well, I think the main thing is it's just a bit of history and some perspective. The perspective on where we are in the space race now compared to where we've been and where we might go in the future. As we were thinking and designing the exhibit, we would love for the first person to step on Mars to be from St. Louis. Perhaps a young child that came into the exhibit, saw this exhibit, stepped inside one of the capsules, and had a chance to see what it was like.
Destination Moon, the Apollo 11 mission, opening April the 14th, running through September the 3rd at the St. Louis Science Center. And Christina, anything people should know ahead of time before coming?
Just come as often as you can. I mean, there's going to be so much to see. You can come back again and again and discover something new.
Mm-hmm. Anything in the gift shop that relates to this?
There'll be plenty in the gift shop, and a lot of it will be rockets and patches and things, that memorabilia elements that you can buy that give people a chance to experience it and take it home with them.
It seems like to me that going to this would be sort of like taking a class somewhere, a real educational experience, I think, for particularly young people.
Yeah, educational, but also experiential. You're going to experience things that you may not get a chance to anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to thank you both so much. I can't wait to see this. And you made the point, too, that this is a unique exhibition that's not going to be seen everywhere.
That's right. We'd love to have you as our guest.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
That's Destination Moon, the Apollo mission at the St. Louis Science Center. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.